Hello and welcome to another episode of the Construction Corner podcast. I'm Dillon, I'm your host, and on this episode we've got a special guest. And Ben, I will talk about the weather today, mainly because it is really freaking nice. And but like last night when I was out for St. Patty's Day, the bar that I was at, I live in the mountains, so they started a fire. They have like wood fireplace. So they were doing the best kind of recycling, which is burning all of the beer boxes to to get the fire going, and doing it with a blowtorch, as well as having the outside fire pits going. But
Nice.
Matt, my blue collar badass, how are you, man?
Doing well. Weather is not great here today, but yesterday was friggin' gorgeous. So I'll take it when I get it. One of those busy weeks. I'm actually I'm not in studio, which is why I sound like I'm talking through a Coke bottle.
Hey man, that's real life for sure. So, all right, guys, today let's just jump right into it. Today we've got Dave Greene, who worked for decades as a foreman project manager for Greene Architectural Arts, which is a specialty finishes contracting company responsible for, they did consulting, design, craftsmanship, and he was responsible for estimates, bids, management, all that good stuff for projects up to 11 million, which is actually, that's a very big job for just a specialty finishes contractor, and oversaw both union, non-union work across the nation and internationally. So his projects were from municipal, state, federal, monuments, religious buildings, theaters, 7 state capitals, and there's some pretty cool projects that I really want to dive into on what you worked on and doing restorations and all that kind of really cool stuff that frankly you don't hear too much about, but is super important. And we'll talk and do the whole transition through why he left construction and moved over to health and fitness. Frankly, I mean, this is going to be a big piece of it, in really the burnout that happens, after being in the field for over a decade, just the wear and tear, and really how we can help improve contractors' lives and try to maybe prevent that from happening to your folks. So with that, Dave, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks guys. Appreciate you having me on here.
Absolutely, man. It'll be interesting to get a fresh perspective on it. We don't often have guys that are no longer directly tied to construction in some form. So I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, it was a bittersweet sort of removal from the field, if you will. I ended up removing myself, but I love the work we did. I love, I like to say like we were restoring the fabric of America, working on these historical buildings, and it was something that I really held dear to my heart. And there was a lot of inspiration in nearly every single project I worked on. But at the end of it, it was a lot of stress, and I did suffer a lot of burnout, and so I decided to work on something a little more meaningful for me. Ultimately, did a major career shift. Quit my job, divorced my ex-wife, moved from New York back home to Chicago, and started my new endeavor here as a fitness coach, a trainer.
That's cool, man. And I want to get into your new life, but I think if you don't mind, I want to at least touch on your old life, right?
Yep.
I spent a few minutes on Evergreen's website, and holy shit, man, that's some cool stuff that you were doing there.
Yeah. I mean, it really is, the company, I haven't worked for them since 2014. So it's almost a decade out, 8 years out. And I had the pleasure of working on 7 state capitals. Like Dillon said, the company has painted like almost every theater in Manhattan. So we did, the bread and butter was ornamental plaster restoration and decorative paint finishes. And that's everything from straight painting, required, I did the Utah State Capitol. We painted that whole building. We're out there for 22 months. And then all of the decoration in the significant chambers, you got like the Senate, the House of Reps, the Supreme Court, room was there. They have, other ornamental rooms, or what's the word I'm looking for? Ceremonial rooms. and then so there's like 22 karat gold leaf or imitation gold leaf, faux wood finishes, faux stone finishes, murals, and the plaster restoration on top of that, everything from traditional, laying up traditional 3-coat, from lath all the way through to finish. And then how do you recreate ornamental capitals, ornamental crown molding, and all that stuff.
That's really cool. There's a college I follow, and I should have prepped better and remembered the name, but they're down southeast United States somewhere, South Carolina, maybe a little lower.
Mm-hmm.
But they're actually teaching kids, college age kids, how to kind of do the old school plastering and construction art, if you will. So it's really cool to hear about that, what you were doing, and kind of bringing those old buildings back to life.
Yeah. The name escapes me too, but I know it's like in North Carolina or something. I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah.
It's a neat place for sure. They're helping the trades, but in a different way than just your standard, run of the mill trade school.
Yeah. And it's important too, because like I used to have these stats like right at the tip of my fingers, but like at the turn of the 20th century, there were like 100,000 3-coat plasterers, guys that knew how to like put a finish coat on a wall. And now it's like, maybe 10,000, probably closer to 1,000 nationwide. And if, and like we dealt with union, non-union work. I mean, working in all the different states, you have, prevailing wage jobs on government projects, right? But like the unions are more prevalent in different states. Like in the plasters trade, there's the operative plasters in some states. In other states, it's owned by the bricklayers. And most of these guys are synthetic stucco guys. They do exterior, they're doing EFIS or stucco, but they don't know how to lay up like traditional 3-coat. So, I mean, there's a challenge in that trade is, all but extinct in this country. So.
How'd you get into that? It seems pretty specialized, right?
Well, the short answer is nepotism at its finest. I worked for my uncle. But the longer, more roundabout answer, he was a very distant uncle. My mom and dad were divorced. I haven't seen my biological father since I was 9 years old, and he was my father's brother. But I went to school ultimately to study art, and I was doing a lot of foundry work. So I was doing bronze and aluminum casting. So I was very familiar with the mold making process, so I was using rubber and silica or silicone and all different kinds of mold making materials, right? And my uncle was doing a sales trip. Like he knows every theater in every town in the country. He's part of an organization. I don't even know if he's retired now or whatever, but he was part of the League of Historic American Theaters. And he could tell you, like, go through like whatever little town on any little map, and he'd be like, oh, there's a theater there. There's a theater there. So anyway, I was going to school on the West Coast, and he was driving through my town, and just out of the blue, he had called me. I mean, I hadn't seen the guy for probably 15 years or something. That was probably 2002. Yeah. So 2000. Yeah, probably 2000. And like he hung out, crashed at my house. We went out for dinner, and like 3 weeks later, he offered me the job because he knew I knew how to make the molds, which were necessary for the plaster restoration or the plaster recreation. And and I started as a tradesman with him. He put a paintbrush in my hand, and I was painting, ceilings, walls, and doing, molds, helping his more journeyman or senior plasterers there. And then I worked up through the field. Within a year or two, I was a foreman, and then, did that for a while, traveled for 6 years, consistently. And then I told him, I was like, I can't be on the road anymore, and I need to come into the office. I'm dying out here basically. And then he offered me the project management position, and I did that for almost another 7 years.
That's really cool, man. I gotta imagine the travel is brutal for a specialty contractor like that, where you can't rely on, building your own town forever. You're probably on the road constantly.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I didn't even unpack suitcases. I'd be in a hotel room or an extended stay hotel, or, some kind of a furnished apartment, and, yeah, some projects were 3 weeks long, some were 9 months. I think the longest stint I had was in Salt Lake City for 22 months. And that was actually kind of nice. I made some friends and, actually was able to, have developed some relationships. But uh, other than the contractors I worked for, the GCs, the CMs, the other trades, but yeah, I mean, it was fun, but it was a lot of times in hotel bars or bars.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
get it.
Mhm.
Yeah, and the Salt Lake Capitol, it sits nicely like right at the top of the hill there in Salt Lake City. So if you've ever been to Salt Lake City, guys, it's like majestic is like a nice way to put it. Like
Yeah.
on one of the roads coming up, like it sits perfectly on like dead center on the like main street through Salt Lake. So it's kind of cool to see. I've never been in it, but from the outside anyway, it's
I-
a cool building.
I'm pretty sure that's still my handiwork. I don't, if it hasn't, God, that would have been, when was I there? 2000. I turned 30, so 15 years ago is when I was out there. So 2007, right? Yeah. Yeah.
So in some of the work that you were doing, like in lay-in, like gold leaf or some of these others, like kind of walk us through maybe some of the process or techniques for this. Like, and first, I would never have guessed going to like art school, you learn like foundry work for molds and metalworking.
Yeah.
Like that's like not when I think art degree.
Yeah, I mean, it was, I loved it. I mean, I did a lot of glass blowing too, like out of like an Italian furnace, not like they call it lamp work when you got the little torch on your table, but so I was just like fascinated with fire and like the phase change, and like I mean, I loved being around, molten bronze or aluminum. We did a lot of that casting work. But the 22 karat gold leaf is it's really a fascinating material. It's very forgiving. Traditionally they used to like pound it, like these little pearls of gold in between like rabbit fur, and like that's how they would make the leaf. And we would get most of our gold leaf from Italy. Manzetti or something like that was the name of the company. It's like one of the biggest suppliers in the world. And like we had a very intimate relationship with Sep Leaf, who are out of New York. Like they, like it's like I didn't work on the project, but gilding like the Colorado State Capitol dome. I mean, it like, when you bid projects by the way, it's like they do these capital improvements and they're like, okay, they do the budget projections and it's like, okay, I don't know what the number is, but like we need $200,000 worth of gold leaf, materials, but it's pegged to commodity prices. So like that, if you don't do this project next year or 2 years, it may fluctuate, but the surface has to be absolutely pristine, so a lot of spec books call for like a level 5 finish, and it's like, no, like you'll still see, tape lines or whatever on sheetrock or whatever. So you really have to like float out these walls and make them like, absolutely smooth. Because there's no touching up gold leaf. Like you lay it on, and if something you can't just go in and put a new one in. You have to like redo the entire surface. And if that's a 10 by 30 wall or ceiling or whatever you're working on, it's like, you got to redo the whole thing. And you got to have a good solid substrate, so it's got to be primed and sealed properly. And then you use a specialty varnish called Size, which lays up just like Size. And when I started, we used to use a French product, which was a lead-based Sized, which was Lafrancs, and like it was still legal to use. Had gotten around the EPA codes, restrictions in 78 or whatever from 1978. And we'd be like, there are projects I was on where you'd spray that stuff on with a HVLP, paint sprayer, fully masked and everything. But yeah, so you spray this on, and it dries 12 or 24 hours, and you come in the next day, and you would like rub it with your fingernail. If it made this right like squeaky noise, you like knew it was ready, and then you could apply it. And traditionally it'd be in these books. They'd be like 3.5 inch by 3.5 inch squares, and like master leafers could just like flap, like just lay it out perfectly in these like straight lines. And that's part of the appeal of the finish, is that it would be these like little squares. And then they started to put it in rolls and things like that. So it was just more convenient to lay out or more efficient. So, But yeah, it's a cool, I always joke about like, hey, I could gild my toilet if I want. Like nobody would know the difference if I was actually using a solid gold, toilet, or if it was just, yeah, a coating. I don't know why I would ever do that, but
Be a good party favorite.
yeah, cool party trick for sure,
Yeah.
Yeah, just scratch through it. I got ripped off on this toilet. It's supposed to be gold.
Yeah.
But in some of these specialty finishes and going through it, like just the restoration process for the rest of it, what were maybe some of the bigger restoration pieces, or really, talking about restoring the nation's fabric, like with these state capitol buildings and some of the other buildings that you went into? What was, obviously state capitals, we want to maintain those, but some of these theaters, maybe what was the kind of force behind restoring these old theaters and even the capitals?
Yeah, well, I mean, first I'd like to say, America has monuments on par with Europe. Like a lot of times it's like, oh, we're only 250 years old or whatever, and they got monuments from Italy that are 1,000 years old. It's like like some of our buildings are just as beautiful and elegant as anything from the old world, if you will. But a lot, well, it's interesting because like when you look at state capitals, like they will like, oh wait, we're going to build this building, and they would run out of funds, so they would build this marvelous shell, and the architect would have an original design, and it wouldn't be completed, and some of that it would just be down to the paint. It's like, oh, the architect intended to put murals here, but they were never installed because the project took, I don't know, 100 years ago, it took 5-10 years to build the building, and or whatever it took, and they just ran out of the funding. So now, like, you got two parts of things, like, are we, when we get into restoration, is it restoration or conservation? Like, are we really trying to preserve the actual structure and every, save this brick, don't save that brick, the mortar line joints are all crumbled here, it'd be like, you'd be dealing with state architects, SHPOs or Landmarks Conservancy, and you get into these very involved specifications on what the project actually was, and then sometimes you'd be interpreting what the original design was or intent was. And believe me, there's some crazy politics involved with that when you have an architect who's an actual politician. And I mean, literally a politician, not just I know some great architects, yeah. So anyway, lost my train of thought. So sometimes we put in like new murals in buildings where they're like, okay, the murals were never installed in the rotunda, but like we knew this about his notes, or maybe this was the theme. So like we would design original murals, and the company was like, I believe we were the second entity to put original murals in the US Capitol. So like, so the legacy Evergreen is phenomenal. But that is like the government, like our actual fabric, like doing those things. But when we get into theaters, a lot of these projects are privately funded. And they may be getting some grants or something, some tax breaks, because they're restoring a historical building through the Landmarks Conservancy or the national parks, or state organizations or whatever. But a lot of the small Main Street towns you get into across America, it's a really interesting dynamic, because like, I don't care if you're like up west in the Northeast or whatever, where it's like old textile towns, or they used to have tanneries or whatever, you get down into the South, and there's a lot of old like logging pine towns, you got like mining towns. It's like you get into Main Street America and you can kind of see, the industry is left, or left 50 years ago, 100 years ago, maybe 30 years ago, whatever it is. And the town is depressed. And so they'll have some benefactor, whether it's an individual or an organization, that comes in and they rebuild the theater as a catalyst to revitalize the economy. Right. So we're not only like rebuilding the fabric of the country through the actual buildings and monuments, but it becomes a catalyst for commerce, because when the theater opens, well now, and you know, like we're not just talking about movie theaters, we're talking about performing arts theaters. Like, okay, now there's concerts, now there's shows, you know, and it doesn't matter, like, you know, big names will come in and do these things. So now people are congregating on Main Street again. And what do they want to do? They want to go out and have a meal, they want to go out and hang out, have a drink afterwards, or whatever it is, you know. And then it's like, you know, the restaurants come and the shops open up. So we have seen it act as that catalyst in many towns. And so it, like, that's where it's like, that's was the tear jerker, like very emotional part of this. And you'd be in these old theaters, and some of them were just like, you know, old movie theaters, like single screen theaters, and nobody's building those new, by the way, right? Like it's all, you know, megaplexes, you know, 20 screens and all that. But you know, I remember I was in a town in Maryland, and you know, like some 90-year-old dude walked up to me and he was telling me a story about how he lost his virginity in that theater. I mean, he wasn't getting in details, but he's like, I went to this theater, I had this first date or whatever it was with this lady. And, you know, it's like, you know, like, I mean, those stories are just phenomenal. And I've heard, you know, a million of them from, you know, I was in a chapel in a nunnery once, and this 90-year-old nun walks in, she's just in tears because I was painting like a mock-up for her on what the chapel would look like. And she's like, I've waited my whole life for this, you know. So yeah, so anyway, and when you get into churches, by the way, you know, it's usually the congregation that's, you know, funding it. You know, they might get some tax breaks because it's a monument or, you know, a landmark or something like that. But then they're usually leaning on their congregation for funds to do the work, you know.
That's really neat, man. It's not a trade that I've ever had any personal experience with. So I want to touch on a couple of things you said. First of all, I'd be remiss if I didn't jump right in and say that even 100 and some years ago, when they were designing Capitol buildings, they should have gone the design build route, because then the architects would have designed something that they could have afforded to build also.
Yeah.
We just check that off in this episode there.
Yeah.
But you know, the historical side of it, there's a lot that goes into that I don't think people recognize. You know, you mentioned SHPO. Personally, at a previous company I worked at, we did a restoration of a state hospital up in Traverse City, and Michigan SHPO actually made us, we had to reuse a certain percentage of the exterior bricks on the building. And so we actually hired this local dude, it was this old Italian guy and his son. And for months, these guys sat out there and brick by brick, they chipped off the old mortar, cleaned the lead paint off, and stacked them back up for us to reinstall. Can you kind of speak to that? You're on the project management side for a while, so you had to deal with all of that shit, I'm sure.
Oh yeah, for sure.
The requirements that go into that can be astronomical at times.
Oh yeah. Well, and like, how do you bid work like that? You know? Yeah. You know, and like you're begging for some unit prices. It's like, look, you know, I can give you a ballpark on how many hours, but then like we used to estimate our work on man hours, but it's like, you know, I'm gonna have a union guy come in here, and we'll take photos of all the work he does every single day, you know. And it's tough. I mean, one of the most interesting things we did was, I can't remember the name of the theater, but it was right off Bryant Park in Manhattan, and they had demolished the theater, and they built the one Bryant Park, which is like the Bank of America Tower. That's what it was. I don't know if I'm sure they still own it, but I think it was Bank of America. They got some tax credit or whatever for restoring the theater. And so what they did is they excavated they were calling them artifacts, you know. So like there was a part of the proscenium, which is the ornamental plaster that goes around the theater. It's like the scenium, like right in front of it is the proscenium, right? And so they took a piece of it that was like, you know, 3 feet wide by like 15 feet tall. And we went in, they excavated it, you know, laid it down, and we would inject like specialty, you know, glues, essentially like hardeners into the back to like maintain every component of it. You know, it was ornamental plaster, so it's not like traditional 3-coat, but it had like brown and scratch underneath it, and why I think it must have had wire lath on it. And then like we would go in, and then we built like a armature on the back of it. And so this thing is, oh God, 6 inches thick, 3 feet wide, 13 feet tall. And there were other, you know, there's like a big medallion from a wall that was like 4 feet in diameter and other things. And we injected all these hardeners, built this armature on the back, and the way they install it into into the new theater, which is basically a black box theater. And, so like there, that's true conservation. Like you cannot alter this, you know what I mean? You can't even like recreate it, but I've been there on projects where, yeah, where it's like that, like where they're like, they want to do a full MEP upgrade on a historical building from like the 1800s, right? Like we want to put teledata, security, sprinkler, fire, light, power, and they make Swiss cheese out of the wall, but preserve as much as possible, right? And don't, alter, what's the word I'm looking for? Don't damage the original fabric, like that's a big word they use a lot, right? And then, go back in and like, patch this wall. And then so it's like, the walls become a jigsaw puzzle in Swiss cheese, and you're trying to like wire in lath into this huge, all these channels and routes. And by the way, right, like they drew it all out, but then you open up the wall and, oh, well, there's unforeseen conditions in here, right? Like the beams don't go the way we thought they did, the posts and the columns or whatever are where they are, or the whole wall falls down, whatever. And, yeah, yeah, right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Did they use drawings, 200 years ago? Anyway. And then, so it's a real freaking challenge. Right? And then you're like, hey, if you want this to look beautiful, like we have to put a finish coat over the whole entire wall, but they're like, well, we don't want that because it's not the original. And then you like try to put the gold leaf on it or whatever the finish is, and it doesn't look right. It looks like it's on a wall full of patches. Lord forbid there was an actual change order come down from the owner when they're like, oh, I didn't want the light switch over here. I wanted it on the other side of the room, like, or whatever, it's challenging. It's really tough. So part of the difficulty of the projects is we'd go in and we bid them. Here's how much it costs and here's how long it's going to take. Right. And then you're on some project that's going to take 2 years. And we're like literally the last trade in, and they have liquidated damages on the project. And you're like, they're like, why can't you put 10 coats of paint on that wall in a day? Like, why can't you compress your schedule? I'm like, well, I can, but I won't. Will you accept not having a warranty on the work? And I'm pretty sure the architect / owner's rep or whoever's got to approve this thing is not going to sign off on that. And I'll be, by the third time you do it right, or whatever. What's that old saying?
Yeah.
That's fair.
Anyway, yeah.
It's really cool on the theater piece that those really become the catalyst for reinvigoration of downtowns. Like I'm thinking here, there's a town pretty close to me that has that same thing, right? It's got the old town square, it's got some monuments, it's got the pool like right across from the square downtown. There's a few restaurants that have come in, but it used to be a big logging town was the primary industry there, where the rails come right into town. They would unload the logs from the mountains, and that industry's kind of just left, and they've turned the rails into trails. And so now I run along them, but there's an old theater there that would be like, it's a single theater, would be perfect to be renovated. And then around it, there's all the restaurants, bars, and then there's a big park and green space next to it. And I could just picture having that renovated to really be the catalyst for, small community, few thousand people or whatever, but it would really reinvigorate a lot of that. And then bring in people from out of town to come and see a show or whatever might, be there.
Man. I think it's critical, and it kind of gets into a larger discussion about, kind of bringing things back to America and maybe spending a little bit more money for an American made thing, like the sound quality in a little theater like that may not be like the Dolby megaplex, but the architecture of the sprawl, I'd go into towns too, and it's like you'd see the main street, and then it's like I was working it was in Maryland. I remember I was like in a furnished apartment. I'm looking out, and like it's just like you could see the sprawl go for miles, and you got your big box stores. I'm not going to name any names, and it's like just the architecture of nothing, and now like we see some contraction on some of that, where you see these strip malls that are just vacant. and it's you know, it's a little like quality over convenience, if you will. So anyway.
Well, and the experience of it, like these old theaters and stuff, like it's an experience, and going and seeing them, or the feel of it, and
Oh
Matt,
yeah.
I'm sure you had something else there.
So Dave, you had a pretty cool career doing some pretty cool stuff in construction, but let's kind of switch gears, I guess. And you obviously left for some reason. So why don't you touch as much detail as you want on why you left, and where you're at now?
Yeah, I obviously I had a lot of pride in the work, or maybe it's obvious, right? Like I loved what I did, and I thought it was important. And I left college, took this job, and I was on the road, for 6 years straight. And it turned out to be so much of my identity. Like I tie everything I had into the work. Like I was like, oh, it was important. It was good. But then it's like all of my relationships were coworkers, and all of my time was spent on the job, as a foreman / project manager. Like I'd work my, whatever 8 hours in the field, and then I'd go back to the apartment or hotel where I was staying. I had to do the administrative side of things, so I'd be doing that. And then, and then like all my socializing, or the vast majority of it, would be with my coworkers, and so it became everything. It defined every ounce of my fabric, or every fabric of my being. And yeah, and like whatever, you're on the road for 6 years, and I wanted to be married someday and have kids and do that whole thing. And it's like I couldn't keep a stable relationship. I'd meet a girl maybe in the town and date for a while, and maybe be serious, maybe it'd just be more fun. But then it's like, well, I'm on the road again in 3 months, and even if I really like that girl or whatever, like it's like, well, that would never last because I'm on the road. And like I had married guys that or girls too, that worked for me in the field, and it's like like they're away from their family and their kids, and yeah, so anyway, like there's a lot of time in the bars or just sitting there drinking. It's like how I pass the time, and not, in hindsight, it wasn't enough time working on myself, and taking care of my own health and wellness, because I was so fixated on the work. It's like all I had. And that ultimately led to the burnout, and my workload was pretty intense as a project manager, because it was a kind of unique role, because I was responsible for front of house and back of house. I had to do sales and estimating and bids, and then I had to manage projects too. So, at one point I was managing something like 30 projects in like 7 different states. And I'll never forget my boss. He said, he's like, how much time do you spend on, this is my uncle again, right? How much time do you spend on every single job site every day? And I was like, well, I was in Manhattan. Obviously I was like, well, that one's in Brooklyn, and, that I'm working in Albany. I got a job down in Virginia. I got some jobs in DC, and, so like I try to rotate through these ones, at least spend 4 hours a week on these ones. Like I get up to Albany, whatever, every month, or whatever the requirement was at that time. And he looked at me and he said, you need to visit every single job every single day. And I said, well, that's impossible. He's like, with that attitude, it is. And I was like, no, it's actually impossible. One's in Albany, one's in Richmond, there's some out in Jersey, but, so it was a combination of, like my own not prioritizing myself, and that spiraling into, a little bit of depression, definitely a lot of drinking, and just the most succinct way I ever heard project management defined was the management of unrealistic expectations. So I'm being squeezed in the role between my boss, my coworkers, my clients, and all those things. And yeah, it was like this perfect storm. And I was in a bad place, a real bad place. And so I had to go. I quit.
I get it. I traveled extensively for about a decade a while back, and when you're bouncing around from hotel to hotel, there's not really much else to do other than get drunk or drink,
Yeah.
you know, just drink till you got to go to sleep and then get up and do it
Yeah.
again. You know, hotel gyms are still utterly dismal places to be. You know, they're crappy old treadmills usually, and that's about it. And I can understand the burnout factor, man. So you left, you made a huge life change, and what'd you step into?
Well, you know, before I quit, I started CrossFit. It's one of these things where I had a coworker, and it's kind of funny. He would, for years, we happened to work together on a lot of projects, and he would always find a CrossFit gym and a grappling studio. And he's like, "Oh, you got to try it. You got to try it." And I'm like, "Nah, nah, nah, nah." And we were good buddies. We'd hang out at the bars or whatever, but he would always like do his work and then go get his workout in. You know, it probably been 6 or 7 years, you know, and then I finally was like, "Oh, I went and tried CrossFit." And the reason why I did that was because I had asked my ex-wife to marry me, and I was like, "Oh, I want to have kids, and I need to establish a habit," and I did, you know. And there's kind of this classic, you know, mythos or whatever about CrossFit is like, you know, it's like it's a cult, you know, you start it and then all you do is talk about CrossFit. You know, number one rule is about CrossFit is you always talk about CrossFit. But it changed my life. You know, it reminded me of who I was when I was younger. You know, I played sports through college and, you know, just D3 intramural or intracollegiate club. You know, it wasn't like some D1 program or anything, but I, you know, it reminded me of the, you know, how good it felt to move and exercise and start to take care of that part of my life, you know, and how important that was to me. And, you know, it became part of my routine. You know, I was still working. I had to be on job sites, you know, 7 o'clock in the morning. So I would go do workouts at like 5:30. And, you know, and I used to walk around Manhattan with like my messenger bag for work and my gym bag, you know, and just, you know, all the time. And then I found, it, I saw that the transformation it helped people, others have also. You start to see people like, for me, it was a lot of women, like they're like 30 years old and they do their first pull-up like ever in their life. And you see like the kind of realm of possibilities expand. I mean, you could literally see it in their eyes when they do their first pull-up. And I was like, wow, that's really, really powerful. And, you know, and I was like, well, I could do this. And I started to look into training and being a coach. And I did like an apprenticeship, whatever, in Jersey City at CrossFit Jersey City. And then I was getting really disgruntled with work. So I started to make some maneuvers to open my own gym. And originally I was going to do that on the East Coast. And then I was having a conversation with my mom. My marriage was falling apart too. And she's like, "Well, why the hell are you staying there? You quit your job." And you know, so I ended up moving back home to Chicago. But it was really about me trying to help people, you know, live better lives. And there's a bigger picture to me for it also to me is, and this goes back to even before, you know, our pandemic over the last, you know, 2 years. And is that there's something failing in Western medicine when all we talk about is alleviating symptoms and not actually handling the underlying causes. You know, there's this myth that like we can live whatever lives we want and there's some pill or procedure that's just going to make us healthy. You know, how to truly be healthy, you know, physically, mentally, spiritually, and in our relationships and careers. I think that you need to do the important work of working on yourself and your own fitness. And that was maybe that was the big thing. Like I was doing important work, but I wasn't doing the right important work, you know. And looking back, you know, what I do now is like I have 2 kids. I got 2 boys. They're 4 and 2. I'm 45. You know, I've been married to my current wife for about 6.5 years. And like I like, where would I be if as a father if I wasn't present in their lives, you know, like on the road, you know. Where would I be if my health was failing 20 years from now and they need to be like taking care of me and those sorts of things. So these are the kinds of issues that I deal with and I help other people cope with too, you know, that you know, so it's about making changes like that.
I think it's a big step to make, you know, but it's crucially important, you know, what you're doing and what you're trying to instill in people. You know, it's unfortunate that some people will go about living and never get to that point, right, where they recognize that that self-preservation should be key, and self-development, right? It's epidemic to the construction industry, right? We don't, as a whole, take care of ourselves worth a shit. You know, you eat crap food during the day, you drink too much at night. When you get hurt, you get prescribed a bunch of pills, and it's just this perfect storm that, you know, it ruins lives. And that's, you know, Dillon and I talk about all the time, you know, different ways to improve the lives of the industry at large, whether it's technology or, you know, whatever the thing may be. This is a kind of a new facet, what you're doing, that we've never really touched on. But it's crucially important, right? We need to push this more to our industry, to everyone in the country as a whole, but we focus on construction a lot. You know, there's ways to be healthier and to preserve your sanctity of life, right? And you're kind of showing us how to do that. So it's impressive to see. It was a big jump, I'm sure. I'm sure it was not an easy decision, but you know, it sounds like it's working out for you.
Well, yeah, I mean, it was not an easy decision. You know, like I was definitely disgruntled and not happy with my career, but I was heir apparent to take over the company. You know, I left a potential 7-figure income to start my own business. You know, and I was, you know, when I started my gym, I was living in my buddy's attic on an old mattress. He was recently divorced. You know, and I was working out of his garage. You know, I was making like $500 a month for, you know, 18 months, you know, just trying to, you know, get in the black. And, but, you know, it is important, you know, and it doesn't really matter what your career is, you know, and I certainly, you know, have a intimate knowledge of, you know, I worked with dudes and ladies from all over the country. And like, you know, one dude came to work for me when I was in Topeka working on the Kansas state capitol. And like, I hadn't even met the guy. He'd been working for the company for a while, and he flew in. He got set up in his hotel room where he was staying, and he had a heart attack, like before I even met him. And the first time I met him was in the hospital, you know, and I'm calling his wife, and, you know, and he was stable and whatever, you know, and you know, and bringing him magazines, but yeah, he's, you know, freaking hospital gown with all these tubes in him. And it's like, that's the first time I met the guy. And I have plenty of people. It's like, well, how many times have you been married? And their, you know, health is less than ideal, you know, and it's pretty obvious. But it's not like you got to go out and like join a CrossFit gym or, you know, or do anything crazy. I mean, you're talking about hotel gyms. It's like there's plenty of work you can do in 15, 20 minutes a few times a week to, you know, take care of your physical health and the benefits that come from just a very basic routine, like your confidence, you know, and like whatever, we're a bunch of construction dudes and we're tough and all this and that, but it's like, you care about what you look like. You care about how your wife looks at you and what she thinks when she's looking at you. And, you know, if you feel like a piece of crap or, you know, like you're not going to be the best worker. You know, our egos get inflated. You know, I've been there even as a gym owner. I'm like, I don't need to work out, you know, like, you know, or like whatever, it's good enough. And it's like, you know, when I started doing CrossFit, it's like I wanted to have kids, but like I didn't finish this part of it. Like, but I didn't want to be the dad that like throws the ball for 90 seconds in the backyard. Then I got to go sit on the porch, you know, like what kind of quality relationship would I have with my children if that was what it was? And I mean, this is kind of speaking to a larger crisis, I think, that's going on with, you know, men, and I'm a man, so I have to speak from this advantage, but like I was raised by my mother, you know, like there's a crisis of like not a lot of real males. We have like generations of boys that have been raised by women and don't know what it means to be a real man, you know. So like, you know, some of these dudes out here, like, you know, sitting there drinking your beers or whatever around your kids, it's like we got to do better, you know. If you have problems with current political climate, you know, like maybe this is something we can do, you know, master ourselves in order to improve our families, improve our communities, improve our country. You know, I don't want to get off into politics too far, but I think it's all related, you know, and that's another reason why I was like, man, I want to go help this country. I want to go help people, you know, through fitness and, you know, and everything that, stems from that or expands beyond that.
Uh, Amen to that, man. You're
Yeah.
spot on everything you just said. We could go down a rabbit hole in politics and in the current state of affairs, but
Yeah. Talk for days for sure.
I'm with you there, though.
Dave, where can they find you?
Yeah, so you can always hit me up. My gym is just outside Chicago. It's CrossFit Spiro, SPERO. The website's CrossFitSpiro.com. My email is Dave at CrossFit Spiro. My Instagram is coach_Dave Greene. Those are the main ways to hit me up. Email is probably the best. I don't have my own podcasts or anything like that. I'm just kind of jumping into some other people right now, but like I'm here to help anybody. I don't care where you are in the country. If you have any questions, need any insight, need some tips and pointers, hit me up. That's what I'm about. I'm trying to help people everywhere and anywhere. This is important to me, and so important that I left my old job to do it. And yeah, so that's it.
That's awesome, man. I really appreciate you coming on. I like what you're doing. I have some personal ties to the Chicago area. I was born in Hinsdale and lived in Downers Grove and Darien.
What? I was born in Hinsdale and I live in Elmhurst.
Okay. Were you born in
what year?
Sanitarium?
No, I wasn't, but my sister was. I was born in Elk Grove Village at Alexian Brothers Hospital. My parents lived up in Wooddale when I was born. But all my nieces and nephews and everybody were born at LaGrange.
Yeah. I had to pull out my birth certificate a couple weeks ago to go visit a prospect, and right there on the fucking top of it says Hinsdale Sanitarium and Hospital.
Yeah. I think it's Advent Healthcare now. It's not no longer. I don't think they still call it Hinsdale Sam. But did you go to Hinsdale Central or Hinsdale South?
No, I actually moved. We left when I was 3rd or 4th grade.
How old are you?
42. We left in 90.
Yeah, geez. So you're just a couple. I graduated in 94. So,
yeah.
Yeah, you're just a couple years behind me. That's interesting. So, that's so funny. Small world.
Small world.
So, do you go to were you going? Were you in Hinsdale proper? Like I went out to. I lived in Gulfview, like right across from Hinsdale Central. So I went to Westview and Marker and all those schools.
Yeah, we lived in Downers Grove and then Darien.
Oh, okay, gotcha. Downers. Okay, yeah. Well, my stepfather, my dad, he grew up in Downers, but that's so funny. Small world.
Yeah, man. Awesome. But anyway, thanks for coming on, man. You're not. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me. You're not our average guest by any means, but I think it's a cool story to tell, and it's a super important message that you're putting out there that we all need to be pushing more heavily than we are throughout, not just our industry, but like you said, throughout the whole damn country.
The larger kind of touchy feely side of this is like just being like accepting mediocrity. I can't do that anymore. Like I need to see how far I can push it. With my health, with my relationships, with my career. And to be the best person I can be in all facets. And I hope I can help people do that, inspire people to do that, or at least think about it.
Yeah, absolutely.
For sure. Dave, thank you for coming on. To recap our wide-ranging episode is one, the buildings and monuments that you've worked on. I mean, you can hear that passion come through, the true craftsmanship that we've talked about on many episodes that really is lacking throughout the country, and to have people that are true craftsmen and really bringing back some techniques and materials that you don't often see anymore, I think is truly impressive what you have done. And again, to restore and repair and update some of the to do work in the nation's capital is, again, a very impressive project to be a part of. It's going to be here for a long time, as well as most of these Capitol buildings, and to keep them in pristine working condition, to really repairing and bringing back communities in a lot of small towns. I think that's something that a lot of us maybe forget about is, those small town communities where, flyover states, and people forget about, those little things, or Main Street America. And, it's really where a lot of people live. It's where our food comes from, is from Main Street America. So all that work is super important that you were doing. And then to make a huge transition, I've done it, I've talked about it, to where it's doesn't serve who you are, to your best ability, and ultimately helping others to get the best out of themselves. So it's a scary transition to make from a known entity into the unknown. But I think you're happier for it, and the world's better off for it, for you to follow those passions and to ultimately talk about this type of thing where people are burnout, they're stressed, they're going through hard times, and nobody needs to really do that, and to meet a guy in the hospital bed. It's, if you start asking around on job sites or through your offices out there, how many people have had heart attacks or high blood pressure or strokes, or, they've gone through, like I had shingles. Like, to go through these really stress related events, there's a lot of them. Most people don't talk about them, and you'd be surprised at how many have them, and seemingly healthy people. They're just not carrying the extra 100 pounds, but they have other underlying problems that they're just not talking about. So Dave, thank you come on for making that awareness, and telling your story. And I think it'll help a lot of people. So appreciate you coming on. And guys, share the show. It's all we ask. We don't run ads or do any of that stuff. So that's going to be this episode of the Construction Corner podcast. Thank you all for listening, and until next time.